Good morning.
Morning.
How's everybody doing this morning?
Good.
See a lot of empty table space. We've got lots of good breakfast food. So please get up, help yourself. You won't offend me by getting up. So we're going to get started. We actually were anticipating quite a few more people, but always happens. We offer these workshops, probably a little bit more than half of the people show, which actually indicates to me you want to be here. What if this was a school? And what if attendance? I'm under the impression that if this was a school, half of the students would show up. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. But anyway, welcome to CCIG. How many are here because you really had nothing better to do than learn about OSHA recordkeeping? Do you dream about OSHA record keeping? It's a miserable existence being in safety. Anyway, well, welcome to CCIG. So we picked the timing of the workshop to correspond with your preparing the 300A form, which is to be posted by, let's test the knowledge base, February 1st. Now, true or false, you can wait until now to prepare your OSHA log. Good morning.
You can.
Well,
But it's horrible.
yes, you can, but that puts you at risk. So a lot of people, a lot of companies prepare that 300 form at the end of the year. And technically, if you were inspected, you could be issued a citation because it needs to be kept current within 7 business days of the occurrence of a recordable event. So we're going to learn a lot of details because the OSHA record keeping standard is more complex, in my opinion, than it needs to be. And also, for many of you, maintaining an accurate 300 log is critically important in your business relationships. How many of you are in the construction or construction-related industries? Wow. You know, the general contractors, the owners that you work for, in many cases, they're looking at your work comp experience modification rating. They're looking at your OSHA incident rates. The tendency is to over-report on the OSHA log, and over-reporting can be bad for the business relationship. So what we're here to do today is to learn exactly what does and does not need to go on the log. Because of that, I hope you have come armed with questions, specific questions about cases you have. I'll do the best within my ability to answer those questions. But please, if you have a question, instead of waiting until the end of the workshop, the end of the presentation, please raise your hand and ask it. So with that, let's get started. My name is Gary Glader. Been with CCIG now about 3 years. Prior to that, I was in Chicago, worked for a large insurance broker in that area. Prior to that, I worked in industry and safety down in Houston, Texas. So a little bit about my background. Welcome to all of you. Good morning. So what I'd like to do is start out by giving some OSHA updates to the best of my ability. As you know, we are experiencing change in administration. Whenever that happens, a change in administration, things tend to change in some cases significantly. So we don't know exactly what the new administration, they've not stated specifically what they're going to do in the area of health and safety, specifically OSHA compliance. But based upon the first Trump administration, I'm pretty certain that some of the things we're going to talk about are going to happen. So backing up about 10 years, OSHA revised the record keeping standard. We're going to get into some of this detail a little bit later in the presentation. They revised the record keeping standard, which prohibited employers from doing certain things. There's going to be a little bit of a reversal in favor of employers, I believe, in the next Trump administration. It was not unusual, and I became personally involved in a couple of cases like this, where a business was inspected. And in this particular case, it was a good business that really did care, a big big operation in Wisconsin, cared about the health and safety of their employees. Over the course of about a year, 2 employees experienced amputations, separate incidents. But it was a matter of the employees removing guards from the machine that resulted in the amputation. OSHA inspected, and in addition to other things they found that weren't right, but not horribly wrong, they issued citations. After issuing the citations, OSHA wrote press releases shaming the employer, implying that the ridiculous statement, saying that the employer did not care about the health and safety of its employees. How can you know that? How can you get into somebody's mind just because there were violations? 2 incidents that were actually the result of what the employee did. And in this one case, the business owner was outraged. I mean, outraged. He was very active in the community and very disappointed at what OSHA did. I don't believe that's going to occur under the Trump administration. They will do what they need to do without issuing press releases. Are there employers that don't care about the health and safety of their employees? Yes. In those cases, should they be shamed? I don't disagree with that. The problem was they picked the wrong employer in this particular case and had done that repeatedly.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Also, there should be more latitude, whereas previously there was not as much latitude for employers to implement safety incentive programs. I have some opinions on safety incentive programs. I don't think that an employer should just randomly reward people for not having accidents. The reason is you could do the wrong thing to get away with it, right?
Good morning. Good morning.
How many of you sometimes exceed the speed limit? and I'm raising my hand because I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, the people that didn't raise your hand, you never exceed the speed limit. I don't want you to be here simply because you're not being honest with us. So the question is, you exceed the speed limit. When you went 1 mile an hour above the speed limit, did you get into a wreck? No. Because the point is, statistically speaking, and I'm not encouraging you to do this, you can do the wrong thing and get away with it. It's just luck. It's dumb luck. So when you reward somebody for not having an accident, you're rewarding their luck. It's better to reward people for the positive things they do that contribute to working safely. So my advice would be have safety incentive programs that actually recognize and reward the positive things. I saw you lifting that thing properly. You can give them a $5 gift card. So positive reinforcement goes a long way. The part of the OSHA rewrite of the record keeping standard, this is 10 years ago, was also that they wanted to discourage employers from disciplining employees for not reporting injuries or reporting the injuries late.
Good morning.
Now, I work for an insurance broker.
Good morning.
Anyone on the insurance side of things, and many of you already know, one of the most important things that needs to be done is for the employee to report the injury immediately.
Good morning.
Anyone have any thoughts as to why?
Good morning.
Well,
Good morning.
so nothing happens in between the time of injury and the time of reporting. They could be doing anything.
Exactly.
Anything.
And also, wouldn't it be in the employee's best interest to report the injury immediately so they can get treatment, so it doesn't become more severe? So at one time, OSHA was disciplining employers for disciplining employees for reporting a late injury, which I think is ridiculous. We all want to encourage that immediate reporting. And when there isn't, there need to be consequences. Now, some things take time to develop, like a back sprain. But honestly, in the state of Colorado, an employee has 10 days to report an injury legally to be covered. So you could amputate an arm and then come in and say, oh, hey, By the way, I forgot to tell you, the reason I'm missing the arm is I lost it in the machine. And they have 10 days to report that. But that doesn't mean that you as an employer can't discipline that employee. I think one of the most important things is to emphasize and enforce prompt reporting of injuries. And believe it or not, at one time, OSHA was discouraging employers from implementing post-accident drug testing programs.
Good Lord.
Now, you're shaking your head, right?
Good Lord.
You wonder. I'm actually 32 years old. This is what dealing with this stuff has done to me. You don't have to laugh that hard.
I'm sorry.
So,
Good Lord. Good Lord.
what OSHA wants to avoid is just arbitrarily picking people for a drug test. So what they would prefer to see you do, and this is splitting hairs. How many people in HR here?
Good Lord. Good
Just
Lord.
one. All right, Benita, I'll be picking on you then. What you want to do is for-cause drug testing. OSHA was concerned that simply because an employee got hurt doesn't provide reason for that employee to be drug tested. So instead, what we need to do is create a reason why we believe that person should be drug tested. It's really splitting hairs, but your drug testing programs, instead of being worded, my recommendation, instead of being worded automatic post-accident drug testing, this does not include automobile accidents. Auto accidents are not within the jurisdiction of OSHA. These are injuries on the job, is to implement a for-cause drug testing program. And to give you a ridiculous example, if I'm working in a shop and I'm at my machine, my workstation, and I'm doing nothing wrong, and somebody strikes me on a forklift because they were doing something wrong, to require me to take a drug test because I was standing in the right place, at one time OSHA had a problem with. Now, this has sort of been relaxed. I believe this will be relaxed under a Trump administration because many companies, in fact, you can raise your hand if you want to, many companies have a automatic post-accident drug testing program. Anybody want to raise their hand? So you should be safe now.
Okay.
I also believe this is really kind of interesting, and this is proven to be the case over many administrations. I can't think of how many presidents I've been alive
Good Lord.
to experience, 8, 9, I can't remember, whatever the number is,
Good Lord.
that under Republican administrations, what tends to happen is, believe it or not, there is more enforcement.
Good Lord.
More enforcement, but less creation of new regulations. Under Democrat administrations, what tends to happen is that there are more regulations being developed, but not quite as much attention paid to enforcement. It's kind of interesting. Might throw people off a little bit, but that has been the tendency. So I don't believe we'll see a lot of new regulations coming down the pike in the next 4 years. But I wouldn't take comfort in the fact that there won't be inspections, because the philosophy is if we have regulations, let's enforce the ones we have. The good news is the number of fatalities, the number of injuries does seem to slightly decline, maybe stay even, while the number of people in the workforce in the United States grows. That's good news.
Good Lord. Good Lord.
I
Good
mean,
Lord.
it kind of makes sense doing the for-cause drug screen as opposed to post-accident. Because I feel like many times employees aren't reporting their stuff right away because they're worried about a post-accident drug screen.
Yeah,
Good Lord.
I think that's a
without question.
Yeah.
Without question, Mike, that is absolutely true. People fear that.
Good Lord.
People fear that. It's a complicated situation because as cannabis becomes legal in more and more states, The problem with cannabis is the fact that there is not a readily available test for intoxication or impairment. And to be fair, even alcohol is not a test that shows true impairment. It just shows how much alcohol is in your bloodstream. And we all know people who don't drink, and if they have half a glass of wine, will be under the legal limit, but they probably shouldn't be driving. So until they come up, the problem with cannabis is the most common test can show evidence of the drug in your system for up to 30 days. In hair, I believe it's 120 days. So these are complicated issues, but anyway, thanks for that, Mike. So, yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
72 hours, which again may not reflect what was going on with that person at the moment it happened. So it's a problem. For that reason, I do know of many employers in Colorado that eliminate cannabis from the panel of tests. Just curious, how many businesses eliminate cannabis? Nobody?
Good morning.
How many are doing pre-employment testing?
Good morning. Good morning.
Do you see a lot of positives for cannabis?
Good morning. Good morning.
I guess my perspective there is if you know you're going to apply for a test and they're going to do the standard form of testing, even though you may not be under the influence at the time you take the test, you may want to prepare for the fact that you're going to reject. Although when I was in Illinois, I know this for a fact, there was one company that just couldn't find an employee who didn't test positive. What they've discovered, and there was no connection here, this is really cynical. What they discovered is the employees knew they would fail the drug test, but they were applying for a job to continue their unemployment benefits. And there was no connection between being able to receive employment benefits and not testing positive for drugs.
Good morning. Good morning.
Everybody's looking for a loophole.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right. President-elect Trump has nominated somebody for Secretary of Labor. The interesting thing with this nominee is she has strong support from labor.
Good morning.
So the woman who is going to be the Secretary of Labor, which is over OSHA, has a good relationship with labor, which the Trump administration is depending on a good relationship with labor. But that also means that employers who are not doing the right thing, as I mentioned before, should inspect to have that existing health and safety regulations enforced. Every year, OSHA raises the amount of its penalties by the cost of living adjustment. Now, this year, as of January, the penalties are up to $16,550 per violation, the maximum penalty for a serious violation. You know, if you get up into a willful, potentially your fine could be $165,000. So at one time, believe it or not, early in my career, back in 1931, the OSHA penalties were so small that companies simply ignored the rules because it was cheaper to pay for the penalty than it was to implement a fix. That's changed. So there's teeth here, and the penalties hurt. More importantly, because 3/4 of the room raised their hands if you're in the construction industry, those penalties on your record are harmful, and they may prevent you from getting work. So even more important than the amount of the penalty is the fact that you were inspected and cited, and it's now on your record. Just a quick thing, there's OSHA local enforcement programs. OSHA has 10 separate regions within the country. Colorado is in Region 8. Region 8 has programs that they've picked, regulations they've picked they're going to enforce. This may be different than Region 5, which is the Midwest and Illinois. So there's 14 LEPs. I've listed the ones that are most relevant, likely for the people in this room. Noise exposure is an emphasis program if you're in manufacturing. So we need to be paying attention to what noise levels our employees are exposed to and implement programs around that. Forklifts, powered industrial trucks, crosses both boundaries, construction as well as manufacturing. Work zone safety, road construction. It's a huge issue. People, cell phones, responsible for a growing number of automobile accidents, very close to DUI in terms of responsibility for the number of lives lost. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And we don't enforce a $50 fine. Would you get a $50 fine if you were pulled over DUI?
Good Lord.
And actually, I might argue this is more dangerous than DUI. And actually, you know what made it dangerous? The fact that the number of automobile accidents related to distracted driving increased when they implemented laws prohibiting texting and driving. You know why?
Good Lord.
Bingo. So instead of driving like this, now they're doing this. So at least when you're drunk and not on the phone, you're looking out the windshield. You're texting and driving, you got your head in your lap. It's terrible.
Good Lord.
About 7-8 years ago, we had a client whose foreman was texting and driving, rural part of Illinois. Missed a stop sign, and at the intersection, he T-boned, hit and killed a pregnant mom and her 3 kids. Wiped out the whole car.
Good Lord. Good Lord.
A year later, he committed suicide, leaving a wife and a child behind. I mean, over a text. So anyway, my rant and rave about cell phones, put them down. No place in your hand in a car. I was shocked that Colorado waited to prohibit holding the phone just recently this year, right? Should have happened a long time ago. So we need to take that more seriously. The biggest exposure all of you in this room have is to a catastrophic claim is on your auto insurance where you have employees driving. This is a huge issue. If you want to know the one thing you can do to limit your potential liability, it's emphasize this.
You want to know?
So people that work in work zones, their biggest enemy are people driving through the work zone on their phones. And then a very long program, been around many, many years with OSHA, are focusing on falls in construction. Number one, leading cause of death in construction is a fall from an elevation. So we need to do what we can. What's interesting to me, those of you in construction know that the height that you are allowed to fall depends on what you're working on or working from. Isn't that weird? When do you have to have fall protection when you step into a boom lift? 0 feet. You get in the lift, you got the harness and lanyard attached, right? How about when you're working on a building that has an open side? What height is fall protection required? 6 feet. How about when you're working on a scaffold platform? How many feet are you allowed to fall from the scaffold platform? 10 feet.
How about when?
If you're a steel erection contractor, how many feet are your employees allowed to fall? It depends on what you're doing in steel erection.
24.
15 and 30. So shaking your head because you're wondering, why would there be different heights? Is it possible? Is it possible that the damage to the iron workers are so tough that they can withstand the 30-foot fall? The Federal Railroad Administration allows people to fall 12 feet. These are just silly standards. Lobby groups, it's my opinion. Each group that was impacted lobbied for the regulation. It's crazy. There should be a universal height at which nobody is allowed to fall. And you know what? You could die falling 2 feet if you land the wrong way. So anyway, enough of that. Right. This is a program that for right now doesn't only applies to those in non-manufacturing environments, and it's called site-specific targeting. Now, the interesting thing is this is something that could change. We don't know yet until the new administration comes into play. And if I had to bet, I don't gamble, my bet would be that it doesn't happen, but it could. The construction industry, because of the nature of the work, is probably one of the more dangerous industries that we have. There's a lot of hazards that we need to address in construction. For right now, construction is not part of this program, but there is a possibility it could be. And that is that you are currently, many of you, some of you are currently required to take the information from your OSHA log and report it electronically. Is anybody doing electronic reporting? Nobody? You may be required to, and not going to get into a whole lot of detail here. But what happens is when you report electronically, the government compiles the data, and based upon your incident rates, which we'll talk about at the very end of the workshop today, they are picking companies based on the incident rates to inspect. So the problem is if you're over-reporting on your log and then taking that data and reporting electronically, you could be exposing yourself to inspection. And again, I believe there's a possibility that contractors will eventually be required to report this electronically. So that makes accurate record keeping more important than ever. They also inspect companies that are supposed to report but aren't reporting. Focuses primarily on the DART rate. Again, we're going to get into more detail at the end of the presentation. The DART rate is how many incidents that you have that result in either lost work days or restrictions in work activity. Used to be, they've been doing this for a number of years, probably 15 years. And it used to be, it was very cryptic, but they would publish a list of the employers that they had intended to inspect, but they're keeping that private now. So they have a list of companies they intend to inspect, but I can't access that data to let you know who they're focusing on. And OSHA is conducting inspections all over the country using this particular program. So let's get into record keeping itself. It's a separate standard. If you're in construction, what are the standards called that you're required to comply with? Little quiz here. What number? 1926, not the year they were written. It's called Part 1926. That applies to construction. But you know the number that applies to non-construction or manufacturing? 1910. So we have two books of standards. The record keeping standard is its own. So we have 1926 for construction, 1910 for manufacturing or industry, and we have Part 1904, which is record keeping. That applies to all businesses in the United States: mining, shipbuilding, construction, manufacturing. Subparts A through G contain the specific requirements. We're going to go through each of those in detail today. So let's take a look at the purpose. Really pretty easy. The purpose of the record keeping standard is to require employers, and we're going to find out if you are required or not required, depending on a number of factors, to record all new work-related injuries and illnesses. Probably the most important thing that the statement I could make today is that there is a huge difference between a workers' comp claim and a recordable event. Simply because you have a work comp claim does not make that incident recordable. So you have a gigantic claim, $500,000 reserve on a back injury. And this has been going on for some time. If a claims adjuster at some point of the claims handling process comes back and says, this injury was not work related, that's not an OSHA recordable event. Even though your insurance company has paid out $200,000 for the claim, it was determined not to be work related. So it's really, really important that we disconnect work comp from OSHA recordability.
Gary. So, do you mind?
Oh, go ahead.
So on something like that, so say somebody has a pre-existing condition, but they exacerbate it at work, then is it more of a compensable? We're required to pay for it because it happened at work, but it's not reportable, or?
No, unfortunately, the aggravation of pre-existing condition is also comprehended in the OSHA recordable aspect.
So that's also reportable.
Yes. You hire somebody whose back is on a thread. You absolutely did nothing wrong as an employer. They bend over to pick something up. You just bought the claim and you bought the OSHA recordable event.
Yeah.
Which aggravation of pre-existing, how many of you get aggravated because the employee you thought that was ready to work wasn't ready and you end up paying for a claim? And sometimes the same people have a habit of doing this at multiple locations. There used to be a way, I'm sure it's not legal anymore, where you could do some background checking and find out how many work comp claims an applicant had filed. And I remember Illinois, it was an ancient database that you used to be able to go to, and a contractor asked me to look at an applicant's history, and it was like 9 claims over the course of 12 years for $750,000. Now, it's illegal not to hire that person. I would argue, well, my God, they're dangerous. Not hiring them is a favor to that employee. They're only going to get hurt again and take advantage of the employer. So, yeah, that's one of the more difficult aspects you have to deal with, is the limitations you have on the hiring process and ending up with an injury or a claim that was an aggravation of a pre-existing condition. There are exemptions to record keeping. Any employer with less than 10 employees at any time during the year is not required to keep a log. So, I mean, nobody here is that small. If you are, you don't have to keep the OSHA logs. It's for, it's for the total number of employees within the company, not at any one location. So if you had a convenience store operation with no more than 8 at each location, but you have 10 locations, you have to keep records. There are also industries that are totally exempt from record keeping. CCIG is a business. We don't have to keep OSHA logs, because when they wrote the standard, they determined that, relatively speaking, the hazards, the work-related hazards at an insurance brokerage are not that great. So you'll see retail establishments that are covered, doctors' offices, which is interesting because there's hazards in doctors' offices, but there are certain industries that are exempt completely from OSHA record keeping. And they're listed in an appendix to the standard. So if you ever have an interest in looking at Part 1904, you'll see a list of industries where record keeping is not required. However, all other aspects of the OSHA regulations apply. So if I'm in retail and I operate forklifts, I have to do forklift operator training. I may not have to keep an OSHA log. So there's a lot of business owners that believe because they're in an industry that's been exempted, they don't have to do anything. And that's not true. All the other requirements apply. So a recommendation I have even if you're exempt and you're a decent sized business, it's a way to collect data. Some insurers will ask you to produce copies of your OSHA logs. It's one of the things they use in underwriting the account. They look at your work comp mod, but they may also look at the OSHA incident rates to see what you've got there. Let's take a look at the forms and the criteria. You are only required to record an incident if it is determined to be work-related, which is work-related activity that occurs in the work environment that results in injury or illness. We tend to talk about injuries because illnesses are more rare. They do exist, but we tend to focus on injuries. Or aggravation of a pre-existing condition. So once again, you hire somebody who's had 3 back surgeries and their back is on a thread. If they injure themselves at work, that's an aggravation of a pre-existing condition, and unfortunately, you're on the hook for that. The work environment is your place of business. A job site doesn't have to be in the building you have. It can be at a job site, it can be in the building, it can be a task, it can be at home. Remote workers, they're working on a keyboard and all of a sudden they develop carpal tunnel syndrome. That is a work-related incident because the work environment was their home performing work on your behalf. There are some exceptions to the work environment, which we'll go through now. If somebody is present as a member of the general public, so I borrowed a tool, I'm off today, I borrowed a tool from somebody at work, I come into work to return the tool, and I trip and fall going up the stairs. My own clumsiness isn't an exemption to recording it on a log. I hate to tell you. Stupidity is not a reason to not put an incident on the log. But if I'm here as a member of the general public and not on a work day, my injury is not recorded. Voluntary participation in company activities, Mike?
So if they're not on the clock, they're just returning that tool.
It's not yours.
Oh, it's not?
No,
okay.
not yours. My point was stupid acts are not exempt.
Yeah.
Because OSHA says your job is to make sure he doesn't commit stupid acts. Company picnic, pickup softball game. I slide into second base, blow my knee out. Company ski trip, blow my knee out, doing something I shouldn't do. It's not a work environment. So those are exempt. If I should happen to be injured while eating, drinking, or cooking, that is not recordable either, unless my job is a cook. They need to put that in there. It's like, well, if you're a cook and you get burned with boiling water, it's a work-related incident. But if I'm boiling a pot of water here, to eat my food and I get hurt, that's not a recordable event. Injured performing personal tasks at work. Use your imagination. I don't know what that means. Injured while grooming or taking medication. I'm so committed to my occupation that I've eliminated the hazards associated with grooming. If you eliminate the hazards, you can't get hurt. So I don't have hair. I can never be injured combing my hair. That's how committed I am to this occupation. Self-inflicted injuries. Used to be, my dad worked in a machine shop and he would tell me, this is back in the 60s, that machinists would actually intentionally amputate parts of their finger for money. Now, they wouldn't tell anybody that they did it on purpose, but that's what they were doing. Because if you go to the table, your finger, depending on which joint, how much of the finger is amputated, is worth X amount of dollars. You go to a table to find out what that's worth. Believe it or not, people want money, willing to amputate. So If somebody can prove that you did something intentional like that, it's not recordable. This one's interesting. Auto accidents on company property when commuting are not recordable. This gets complicated. If I'm pulling into the parking lot at work, and the shift that I'm replacing, the person is in their car leaving the parking lot, and we have a collision in two vehicles in the parking lot, those injuries are not recordable. However, if I'm leaving the building and somebody who's coming into work hits me before I get to my car, my injuries as a pedestrian are recordable. That's just how it works. Illness from the common cold or flu, not recordable. And that includes even healthcare settings right now. Now that changed, weird. It changed during COVID. Why did they pick COVID as being something that should be recorded, but not the flu or RSV or whatever? Norovirus, I don't know. Didn't make the rules, but that's kind of how it works. And mental illness is not recordable unless the mental illness is work-related. Now, people laugh at that, but there are actually real-life examples that I could give you of a traumatic event that happens at work that could be recorded, and that's to witness a tragedy. If you witness a tragedy at work, and anybody in here, I almost hate to ask this question, anybody in here ever experience a fatality at work? No one? Well, that's a good thing. I hope you never do. In my career, directly or indirectly, when I worked in chemical plants down in Texas, we had 3 fatalities. Indirectly, with what I do for an insurance broker, probably many dozens of fatalities I've had to deal with. The one notable thing I will tell you, I cannot think of one fatality that I've been directly or indirectly involved with that wasn't easily preventable. They weren't the blue ice falling out of the Southwest plane that crushed somebody's skull just randomly on a sidewalk. These things were all preventable. And, you know, when you drive around, you can see unsafe things being done as you drive that could easily result in fatalities. How many safety people in the room? How many of you drive around and look at buildings under construction and you see no guardrails on the buildings? It's easy to spot. Each of those things could easily result in a fatality. But fortunately, due to just dumb luck, in most cases, they don't. It's the random things that sometimes happen, but they're always preventable. So those are the exceptions to the work environment. The other thing I'll tell you is, ultimately, at the end of the day, you as the employer are going to determine what does and doesn't go on the log based upon the things that we're talking about here. And it's okay for you to make a determination and then change it at some point in the future. For example, that back injury, which 2 years down the road, the claims adjuster says was not work-related, you take it off the log. Maybe you put it on the log to begin with, maybe to err on the safe side until the claims adjuster has got back with you. You don't put it on the log. The point I'm making is you're the one who makes that determination. And you support it based upon the criteria we're going to go through today. Documentation is important. How many of you maintain release forms an employee gets from the clinic before they come back to work? Or invoices that show the medication that was dispensed? All of these things are important documentation because we're going to talk about how each of these things play in your decision. Bottom line is you determine. one thing I've always offered people, in fact, I know one person in the room has come armed with, any of you have questions about incidents, whether or not they should go on the log? This is the perfect forum to ask those. So please, if you have a question about a particular case, ask it. I'll go a step further. As you're preparing the logs and finalizing the logs, I think my contact information was on the title slide. Call me, email me, call me. I'd be happy to answer a question you have about a case. Anytime, well, maybe not when I'm sleeping, but don't hesitate to call. Even if you're not a client, give me a call, because this is important and I want to help you find the right decision. All right, so a lot of employers have employees that travel. They have to go to a different state to perform work. What happens when they're staying, out of their home location? These are called travel-related injuries. So injuries that are sustained from non-work related activities at a hotel are not recordable. So if they're sleeping at the hotel and they get up, they go down to get breakfast and trip and fall down the stairs, it's no different if they did the same thing at their home. Not recordable. Injuries sustained in motor vehicle accidents while commuting from the motel to the job, they're not recordable. No different than your employee driving to work this morning and getting involved in an accident. Those injuries are not part of the work. Injuries sustained as a result of a personal detour from a reasonably direct route of travel are not recordable. What in the world does that mean? So I'm a foreman for a contractor, and I've got to go from job A to job B. And there's a barbecue place that I want to grab lunch at on my way from job site A to job site B. So fortunately for me, the barbecue place is really on my way to job site B. If I get out of my vehicle to pick something up to eat and I trip and fall, believe it or not, that injury is recordable. Or the collision that I'm involved in would be recordable. If, on the other hand, the barbecue joint was 2 miles off of a direct route, you might be looking at me, who writes this stuff? Who comes up with this stuff? And all I can tell you, I don't know, but I can tell you how they're interpreting these things. So this factual thing. So not that that's going to come up very often, or at least hopefully. So an interesting story for the non-work related activity at a hotel. Before I moved back to Illinois, we were in Texas for about 12 years. I worked for a company and we had a sales force, nationwide sales force. They would travel. We had a sales rep who had an incident where she slipped and fell in the shower. So me and the corporate attorney trying to deal with I work closely with a corporate attorney. Is this recordable? Well, at first blush, seems like slipping and falling in the shower is no different than slipping and falling at home before you go to work. Shouldn't be recordable, right? Well, further investigation showed that she was not alone in the shower. Okay. Not alone in the shower, still not work related, right? Well, what we learned upon further investigation is the person she was in the shower with was a prospective client. So at that point, we had to rationalize that she was in fact in the scope and course of employment, and she actually closed the deal in more ways than one. And then our only conclusion is that, yes, this must be a recordable event. And we had a great time talking about that. And it was a female attorney too, by the way. So just to make it a little bit more appropriate, I'll never forget that one. All right, work-related injuries in the home. Injury. So years ago, people started to work from home, even prior to COVID. This has been going on for a long time. And OSHA was faced with questions. There was actually speculation that the agency would need to go into the home to inspect. And it got to the point where, oh, okay, this is ridiculous. OSHA's not going to go into people's homes and inspect. But they had to come up with some interpretation on what happens in the home. Is it recordable? Is it not recordable? So if an employee is injured while working at home and the injury had something to do with the condition of the home, it's not a recordable event. You can't be responsible for cleaning and maintaining people's homes. So if there were toys on the stairs and somebody tripped and fell on their kids' toys on the stairs and became hurt, it's not OSHA recordable. But if the injury occurred from the activities that were being performed at home as part of the work, those are recordable. So keyboarding, carpal tunnel, that would be a recordable event. Picking up a box of files. And the interesting thing is this points to the importance of accident investigations. How many of you do thorough accident investigations? It's important because those are the details you're going to need to learn. Well, I hurt my back at home. Well, how did you do it? Well, I picked up a box. What was the box that you picked up? If the box was food that was just delivered to your home, that's not recordable. If the box contained files that were work-related, well, then we might have a different story. So the extent of your accident investigation, which I encourage all employers to have very aggressive and thorough accident investigation programs, can help you determine whether or not these things are recordable. So what goes on the form? What type of event are we talking about? So here are the things that all employers, once it's been determined that it was work-related and that it happened in a work environment, here are the things that we need to record on the log. Death of an employee. Hopefully you never have to check that box. If you have an injury that results in lost work days, that is recordable. If you have an incident that results in restriction or job transfer, that's recordable. If you have events that result in medical treatment, that's recordable. We're going to define these things in a minute. Loss of consciousness, work-related loss of consciousness, that's recordable, even if the employee doesn't have restrictions, didn't get medical treatment, or lost time. If somebody passes out at work because of something in the work environment, that's recordable. And the last bullet point is any significant injury or illness that's been diagnosed by a physician or licensed healthcare professional. Well, that's interesting. What kind of injury or illness could you potentially have in the workplace that doesn't involve any medication, doesn't involve loss of time from work, and doesn't involve restrictions in work activity?
Probably vision or hearing.
Bingo, you got it. Mike, perfect. Hearing loss. Probably one of the more common things you'll see. Anybody ever have an employee with work-related hearing loss? Well, me too. Although I think rock and roll is probably more responsible for my hearing loss. So yes, those are events that don't result in medical treatment necessarily, lost time or restrictions. And if you have an employee with hearing loss, that's recorded on the log. This is really, really important. It's the physician who determines the actual number of lost or restricted work days. So I always have this question come up. I'll get a call. Hey, my employee got hurt. We sent them to the clinic. The clinic said they could come back to work immediately. The employee called me this morning and said they were hurting pretty bad, couldn't come into work. What do I do? Do I record that as a lost workday incident?
No.
The answer is no.
The answer.
But it cuts both ways. The employee goes to the clinic. The clinic says this employee should not go back to work tomorrow. But this is one of those employees who says, you know what? I disagree. I feel like I can come back to work. So they come back to work the next day. Sorry. It's your physician who said the employee can't come back to work. Even though they showed up for work, number one, you shouldn't allow them back to work, working full duty if the physician said no. In that scenario, that would be recordable, even though they physically showed up to work. So it cuts both ways. One of the things that I emphasize with all of our clients is this is going to come up more than just this one time during a workshop today, is you need to develop a good relationship with your occupational clinic. Has anybody ever sat down with the clinic and explained what your expectations are? How many of you have return to work programs? We got to get a lot of you on board, I think. One of the most important things you have in your tool of risk management, particularly from an insurance standpoint, is an aggressive return to work program. You should be willing to accommodate any restriction that a physician imposes. Because what happens is, I'd like to believe, and I do believe this, that the majority of your workforce is motivated and they want to come to work and they want to put a good, honest day's work in. But you have a small percentage of people that don't. So you don't have a good relationship with a clinic. Worst case scenario, they see their own doctor, and their doctor, they've convinced their own doctor they can't come back to work. So they're sitting at home for 6 months now, being paid. 2/3 tax-free of their income is what they receive. And so you have other less motivated employees who see somebody is at home. So once you don't bring people back to work, it becomes an indication. Two things happen. Number one, it's an indication to those who may not be as motivated to do the same thing. And you've got a bunch of people who are paid to be off work. And the other thing it does, which a lot of times I don't think people tend to think about this, you have good, hardworking people. Is that respectful to them when they know these people are gaming the system and nobody's doing anything about it? They're showing up every day to do a hard day's work, decent day's work. In the meantime, the company isn't challenging a bunch of people who are off work at home getting paid. If I were a hardworking employee, I'd be disappointed in my employer that they weren't doing something about this. So I think there's two implications there. So I would encourage you to work with your occupational clinic. A lot of things factor into this. And we're not doctors, but as we go into this stuff, you're going to learn, maybe I need to get more involved in what's being done at the clinic. For example, I have a slight sprain or strain. At home, if you had a light sprain or strain, what would you do for the strain or sprain? I said, heat pack. How about medicine? What would you do?
The counter.
Tylenol, ibuprofen, right? Well, you sent somebody to the clinic with a slight sprain or strain, and all of a sudden they walk out with a prescription for prescription strength ibuprofen. You know what just happened? I'm jumping ahead here. That's now a recordable incident.
You know what?
That now goes on the log.
You know what?
Now, I'm not a doctor, but I sure would like to know that my clinic And why do you think the clinics have pharmacies? Why do you think the clinic is instructing that employee to fill a prescription for ibuprofen at their clinic? Why do you think that's a motivation? Money. It's money. They're making money. And work comp, unlike group health insurance, is kind of a no questions asked. Whatever, the claims adjuster might question the extent of the medical treatment provided, but otherwise there's nothing statutory that says it won't be paid. It's going to be paid. So the clinics are essentially taking advantage, maybe of you, but more of a work comp system that's just operating that way. Well, when you sit down with your clinic, one of the conversations is, we want you to provide good quality treatment, but where there are opportunities to not prescribe medication, we would prefer that you give the employee conservative advice that doesn't unnecessarily expose us to recording injuries. This is really important. Mike?
So we had an incident where one of our guys was allergic to insulation of all kinds, Monaco, pipe insulation. And he was getting this rash and he freaked out. He lived with his mom. Mom said, yeah, you got to go to the clinic. We said, no, let us take you to our designated provider. He freaks out, goes to his own doctor and gets some steroid topical cream, which was prescribed. So we take the recordable on that one. Correct?
Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, he's working around insulation again, and he develops it again. We give him a write-up and everything for going to his own provider. Then he goes to his own provider again after we tell him not to. And they prescribed it again. And I'm thinking I don't record that second one.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts? Because we told him, listen, guy, you can't do it. He signed a contract, but he did. He just freaks out.
Yeah, I sympathize with you, and I tend to agree that I probably would not record it.
Yeah.
What are you doing with him?
Oh, he's gone. He's been gone. He's been gone since the summer.
And this is another interesting thing. You didn't terminate him because it happened to him. This is my logic. He may have been terminated for any number of reasons. I would terminate him for not having notified you first. He didn't follow the procedures.
Correct.
You can never fire somebody for getting hurt. You can always fire somebody for what it was that caused them to get hurt if it was against the rules. You see the difference?
Yes.
You never fire somebody because they got hurt.
Policy. Not following
Policy.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And on what you're saying, the clinic we use, they're open to have like claims check-ins. I forget what they call it, but we all sit down to lunch and we go over what any open claims we have and what the treatments are going to be and how they want us to proceed with it and how we want them to proceed with it. It's collaborative. It's really cohesive and symbiotic.
And they understand that,
Yeah.
you're their customer, you're their client. And in a business situation, they need to treat you like a client. But if you don't tell them you're concerned about these things, you give them opportunities to take advantage of a situation. There should never be a situation where an employee sees a clinic and leaves this is my opinion, leaves the clinic before the clinic contacts somebody at your company to discuss the case. Return to work is one of the more important things you should walk away with. If you don't have an aggressive return to work program, I strongly recommend that you do. We have a statistical wizard in the room, Bill, back there, who's sitting in that will tell you that.
These states, but other states have this benefit that if an employee does not receive a single dollar of indemnity, then the claim in their mod is reduced down to 30% of the size mathematically.
But irrespective of Colorado, return to work is something you still strongly promote in Colorado. And in Colorado, $1 of indemnity is $1 that counts against your mod. So if you're paying them, that doesn't count against you. If the insurance company is paying them, it does. And I believe it's a cultural thing. I believe strong return to work programs show you, and you know what? Honestly, doesn't it show the willingness of an employer to bring somebody back to work regardless of their capacity? We want you back here. It shows them that you care. You know, what happens is people that are off work, they talk to somebody they know, and somebody goes, oh, geez, have you ever thought about getting an attorney? If you can minimize those opportunities by bringing somebody back to work, it's in your financial best interest to do so. So this is really important. The physician, what's on that release form is what you have to follow. If you disagree with what's on that release form, you should be having a conversation with the doctor of the clinic. It's not the day of the injury that starts counting, it's the day after. So if I get hurt at 7:05 after I punch in at 7 o'clock and I miss the rest of the day, that doesn't count. If I go to the clinic and they say, I have to wait 6 hours to be seen, and the doc says, hey, you're fine, go back to work the next day, even though I missed most of the day except for 5 minutes, it doesn't count as long. The other thing is, when it comes to lost and restricted work days, is that we stop counting 180 days maximum for any one injury. Now, if it happened in December, if it happened on December 30th, and I missed the 31st, I missed one day in 2024, and then I lose time in 2025, we still record those days on the 2024 log. We don't carry anything over. We never carry anything over. All the days lost go back to the year the injury occurred. But then we cap that at 180. So you could have an injury that occurs on December 30th, and the total number of days lost is 180.
Wait, say that again?
Yeah. So are you saying, do we get 180 days after that incident in 2025? Or are you saying?
Well, they're losing time in 2025. You actually record the actual number, and you don't have to cross it out and put a new number in each day on the 2024 log. Let's say you post the log in February. You put the number of days, they're gone. And then at some point, once it's capped out at 180, you correct that 2024.
So say an injury happens in August and they max out that 180 days, but it's, so how many days would that be? That'd be 100 days till December 31st. So anything after that in 25 goes towards 24?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. And how about weekends? Do we count those?
Calendar days. So here's what happened. It used to be, and this has probably been 20 years, I lose track of time. It used to be that OSHA would only require you to count scheduled work days. But an amazing thing happened in industry where if an employee was hurt and off work for 2 weeks, it was incredible, but that employee was not scheduled to work those 2 weeks. It's called creative record keeping. See what happened? See what happened there? So OSHA says, we see what you're doing there. You're playing games with us. So now they count calendar days. Holidays, doesn't matter. And if everybody's doing it the same way, it won't make a difference. And that's actually why they cap it at 180. They came up with 180 because when they changed the rule to require calendar days be counted, they didn't want to statistically make it look like 1 year to the next, all of a sudden people are hurt so bad, they're losing a lot more days if they counted every day. That's why it's capped at 180. All right. Why don't we take 5 minutes? Restrooms, straight down this hallway, the end of the hall. Men's rooms are on the left, ladies' rooms are on the right. Lots of food left. Let's get back together in 5 minutes. Anybody have any questions? Need clarification on anything we've talked about so far?
Sorry, Gary. I have a grip. Sorry, everybody. I've been waiting for this. All right. We got a guy, trip hit his head, didn't report it for like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. But when he did go to the doctor, he was prescribed migraine medications.
Do you
have witnesses?
Yes, there's a witness. He mentioned it to somebody the next day. He didn't report it. He didn't say, he said, oh, I fell, look, I scraped my arm. So what the company did was the executive group took care of his bills, just to be nice.
He went to
his own doctor, They prescribed migraine medication, didn't report it for 2.5 weeks. I feel like we should be responsible for this.
I'm a safety guy, and I know your company, and I know the programs in place, and I would agree with you. The employer makes the decision. I'm not guaranteeing somebody won't disagree with that.
Okay.
But all that's documented, right? That he didn't report.
Oh yeah, everything's documented.
What happens in the ether away from work, I have very little sympathy. I sympathy for the person who didn't follow the procedure. It would give me heartburn knowing what you do and all the programs you have in place to have to eat that without knowledge of it. That's my opinion.
So earlier you said that there's that Colorado allows 10 days for employees to report incidents, 2.5 weeks, 17 days. So what exactly is that 10 days mean?
Well, there's two things. There's workers' comp, and there's what we're talking about as far as OSHA recordability is concerned.
10 days.
Yes. Illinois is 45 days. You can amputate limbs in the state of Illinois and wait 45 days to let your employer know about it. You're going to lose a lot of blood in those 45 days.
So then I guess piggybacking on his question, then the 10 days for compensability, workers' comp. And then, so what about the OSHA recordable? Is there a time to report?
No.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no time frame. I mean, and if you think about it, like an occupational disease.
Sure. Well, right. You may not even know it's there.
Right. Hearing loss, it's happening. But if you have an employee who, we're talking about OSHA record keeping. We're also talking about risk management. You have an employee 2 or 3 weeks later, this gets into a gray area, and it's one of the reasons why at CCIG we have claims advocates who really know their stuff to help you through these things. But you have an employee who waits 3 weeks to report what appears to be a serious strain or sprain. I would fight that as far as compensability is concerned, and push back and say, hey.
I wanted to.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And
So, okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for
One more
all the
question.
questions.
So you had mentioned that job restrictions are a recordable, but I've worked for several companies that would put workers on light duty.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a restriction and light duty?
Same thing.
So what's the point of light duty? Why wouldn't they just?
It's just a different way of phrasing the same thing. Light duty is limited duty or restrictions in work. They're all the same thing.
So it wasn't really a way for them to get out of
No,
recordable so much as they just didn't want to
controlling the incident. Light duty is a way for you to control your cost. If you bring that employee back to work, you're establishing a culture that, you know, we're going to bring you back. We're going to find something for you to do, as well as managing the cost of that claim. Instead of having an insurance company pay them on light duty, you're paying the employee, which is less money the carrier is paying.
You don't want to stay them on your clock
Yes.
as much as you can.
So, you know, it's different dynamics because for contractors, especially contractors that are highly scrutinized by owners and general contractors, lost workday events count against you. It's your work comp mod. All these things are being used to evaluate you and potentially restrict you from bidding. You know, if your mod goes over 1.0, there are many general contractors and owners that say, we don't want you bidding work for us.
In here, and then once this is filled, it was like the jelly bean and put it back.
Well, depending on the situation, depending, look, if the only way you can get somebody to come back is to do that, I would tell you to do that. Honest to God. Now, if we can find something productive, but so there's a couple of things. It's a great question. It's a great question because it makes me remember to talk about things that could go wrong with a return to work program. If the light duty or return to work program is much more appealing than the regular job, then you have not motivated somebody to get better and go back to their regular employment. There was a famous case in Texas, and I'm talking decades ago, where they had a return to work program that they had to modify, and then it worked. So it was public works employees, and when they were injured, they were brought back to work, but in the office, doing office tasks. This is in Texas, where it's hot and humid, and you'd rather be in air conditioning than be outside doing the work. So what they found was nobody wanted to go back to work from the light duty. So they had to change the light duty to involve outdoor work, and these public works employees, you know, the stick with the nail in it that you use to pick up trash, that was the job they were given. So you want the light duty task to the best of your ability to try to motivate people to go back to work on their regular job. Does that make any sense? So to your point, to make a point, if you want to have people count jelly beans, you have them count jelly beans. They're getting paid.
Yeah.
They're getting paid their wage.
I think an experience my first 5 years. You know, and you have quite often just the highest thought I've ever seen. It actually has to do with this topic. 5.93.
13.0.
Yeah.
13.
Reason for that is the company that did prison fund management. So the install as well as the customer service. And they had carpal tunnel syndrome that became contagious. Somebody got carpal tunnel and got 6 months paid off work. So everybody else is like, hey, this sounds nice. I want this too. Next thing you know, the whole floor has it. Oh,
That's true story. Another one, in fact, it involved carpal tunnel as well, was in a chicken processing plant. And one of the networks, I think it might have been CBS, did a 60 minutes on carpal tunnel and chicken processing facilities. And suddenly it wasn't the bird flu that spread, it was carpal tunnel. And this is, again, many decades ago, but other people that worked in food processing operations suddenly developed carpal tunnel as well. So yeah, return to work. It's a program that should be done well. Some other tips. Great question. I'm glad you brought this up because I don't have many opportunities to talk about this. It should not be an unlimited return to work situation. It should be time limited. In other words, the temporary job that you create with restrictions should be offered in a way that you can reevaluate 30 days from now, 60 days from now. And what you're trying to avoid is the legal angle of somebody saying, effectively, you have created a new job for me involving these restrictions. An attorney might say, well, you've been letting him do this for a year and a half. This is his regular job now. So you want to limit it. It's called time-limited return to work. So you give yourself because at some point there are some people that you just want to get rid of. And there might be a point at which you want to terminate that relationship with the limited duty, restricted work activity. And that time gives you the opportunity to say, we're not prepared to re-up that now. We don't have that work. Any other questions? Great questions, by the way. All right, let's go back and talk about, we talked about how to record lost work days. Same thing with restrictions with one little twist. So there's 4 boxes: death, days away from work, restriction or job transfer, other recordable, which is medical treatment. So we mark the job transfer or restriction box. It's anything that keeps an employee from performing their routine function of the job. So let's say you have an employee and once a year, they're required to tilt a 55-gallon drum, 400 pounds, let's say 400 pounds. They have to do that one time a year. It's not actually 400 pounds they're lifting because it's a lever, but they have to do that one time a year. Otherwise, they're doing inspection work that has no physical requirements at all, except for walking and standing and sitting. They claim they've hurt themselves at work, and the doctor says no lifting over 50 pounds. And you say, oh, well, that one time a year, they have to move that 55-gallon drum. No, that's not routine work. It's their routine work that counts. The other thing is that the restrictions have to actually apply to the work that's being done. So, for example, you have a quality control inspector, and they slip and fall, and they have a strain or a sprain from the slip and fall. And the doctor says, well, you can return to work, but you've got a 25-pound lifting restriction. Well, they never have to lift 25 pounds. So here's another point about the relationship with the clinic. They never have to lift 25 pounds as part of their job. That's a restriction that doesn't apply. So effectively, they have no restrictions. It shouldn't count against you. If they've been restricted from doing something that has nothing to do with what they're doing, why would you count that on the log? So wouldn't it be best, though, if the clinic gave them a full release? Anybody have any ideas on how the clinic could avoid doing that?
Repeat.
You provide them with job descriptions. Actually, in an ideal situation, maybe this doesn't work in construction because you have job sites. In a factory, you have them come visit the location. Have them observe the work that these people do. But if I got a restriction, if I got a release like that from the clinic, I would call them back and say, You understand, this employee doesn't have to do any of this. I want a clean restriction to put in my, or clean release form to put in my file. Anybody have a question? Saw a hand go up. So that's important. Look at do the restrictions actually match the work that this employee has to do? And if they're restricted from doing something that isn't part of their job, it doesn't count. Medical treatment. This is going to be the box on the log that says other recordable. Medical treatment is specifically defined. They actually list 13 things which comprise first aid treatment. And if it isn't first aid treatment, it is a medical treatment that does go on the log. So let's take a look at those. If somebody simply goes to the clinic just to be checked out, simply to be checked out to see what's going on, the visit to the clinic is first aid. It's not medical treatment. You're just erring on the safe side. Things like x-rays and blood tests and other diagnostic procedures, doing those tests doesn't make something recordable. So that's considered first aid. Using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength is first aid. Back in the creative record keeping days, like I was engaged in early in my career, we knew that prescription medications were required to be recorded on the log. So we would tell the physician to tell the employee to take ibuprofen, but instead of 2, take 4. And that was creative record keeping, and we dodged putting it on the log. That is no longer allowed. Somebody cuts themselves, doesn't require a stitch. If they get stitches, recordable. Butterfly bandage, not recordable. Tetanus shot from that cut, not recordable. Cleaning, flushing wounds, putting antiseptic on the wound, that's all first aid treatment. But again, once you get that stitch, it is recordable. Hot or cold therapy. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which is going back to my point about it's a work comp claim. You're going to get the $300 or $400 bill from the clinic, but it doesn't go on the log. Pardon me? Honestly, that's a great question. I don't know if surgical glue is included or not. Anybody know?
I don't think it's a first aid. So
I would think.
But I think I heard certain types of glue can be recordable, right? So
maybe prescription glue.
Well, like surgical.
Oh, surgical glue.
That's just what I heard. I have not done the actual research on it. Yep.
Yeah, great question. I honestly don't know. Hot or cold therapy, not recordable. Elastic bandages and wraps and stuff like that, not recordable. If you have to transport somebody from a job site to the hospital and you use immobilization devices, that doesn't count. This one blows me away. Drilling a fingernail or toenail to relieve pressure is considered first aid. And if you smash your finger, you get a blood blister, and they will oftentimes drill a hole in it to relieve the pressure. Somehow I think in a clinic when they pull out a drill, I'm thinking that might be some kind of medical treatment, but not according to the experts at our government agencies. Using eye patches. You can be a pirate now, but it's not recordable just because they put a patch on your eye. Removing foreign bodies from the eye using only irrigation or a cotton swab. Anybody know where they go from flushing or a cotton swab to get stuff out of the eyes. Oh, it's awesome. It's how you preach the use of safety glasses to employees. They have magnets. Now, if you use a magnet, rub the magnet over the eye, that is medical treatment. That's recordable. You know where they go if there's metal embedded in the eye after they try to get it out with the magnet? Anybody know? They drill it out of your eye. They drill it out. You want to get somebody to use safety glasses? Show pictures. I have a picture. Anybody? I've done presentation. Anybody ever seen the picture I show of a guy with a 16 penny nail in the eye? That gets people's attention. Yeah, they drill it out. Yeah, that's medical treatment. Yeah, never forget, I taught an OSHA 10 hour, and there was an older guy in the room. Now I'm the older guy. Anyway, I told people sarcastically, you don't have to wear safety glasses when you pound nails because the nail only goes into the wood, right? Well, anybody ever have a nail come flying back at you when you hit it with a glancing blow, right? So he went on to tell the group, he said, back when I was young, I hated wearing safety glasses. They were uncomfortable. They fog up. I just hated them. And he explained that he was framing 16 penny nails, hit the nail, and it came back and it went halfway through his eye. Then he went on, and he had a glass eye. You could see this. But it was a pretty powerful statement that he made. And he explained that when the nail went in his eye, his first gut reaction was to pull the nail out of the eye. But instead of pulling the nail out of the eye, he actually dislocated his eye. So now he said with the one good eye he had left, he was looking at the other eye on a 16 penny nail. Oh, yeah, he's talking about this with everybody. But the most powerful thing was what he said. And he was trying to make a point to the younger guys in the room. He said, ever since that happened, nobody had ever seen him without a pair of safety glasses. And I'm thinking, no shit, dude, you're down to one eye. It's a hell of a time to get religion. Oh, I lost an eye. I think I'll wear me some glasses. Now he just wears a monocle. And he looks really cool. I made up the monocle part, but the other part's true. So, yeah, there's ways to get religion in safety, and one of those ways is really kind of painful and in many cases permanent. So the things we went through, massages, finger guards, these things are all first aid. Drinking fluids for heat stress. Now, is IV first aid? Yeah. No, you stick a needle in the arm, that's going to be medical treatment. So drinking fluids to relieve heat stress, not recordable. If it isn't on this list or the things we talked about, it's going to go on the log. It's going to be considered medical treatment. Physical therapy is medical treatment. So if somebody is returned to work, full duty, but they have to go for physical therapy, that makes it recordable. So again, one more word of caution with your occupational clinic. Many occupational clinics have physical therapy operations. I have actually seen employees being prescribed physical therapy for a finger laceration. Really? And why do you think the clinic prescribes the physical therapy? Exactly. So your companies are either experiencing the OSHA incident that needs to be recorded as a result of that and the additional cost. So this is why I keep emphasizing the importance of establishing a really good relationship with your occupational health care providers. You're their customer. And we're not doctors and we're not telling them how to practice medicine, but we are telling them what our expectations are. You provide effective but reasonable treatment to our injured workers. We want them to get back to work. That's the objective, right? Number one, we didn't want them to get hurt in the first place. But if they do, we want to provide good quality treatment and get them back to work as soon as possible. Loss of work-related consciousness. So, you know, if it's low blood pressure and an employee passes out at work, that loss of consciousness is not work-related. Now, usually work-related loss of consciousness has some serious implications, like there's not enough oxygen in the space. That's a bad thing. And that happens in confined spaces. So you send somebody down into a storm system manhole and they lose consciousness, that's work-related. And unfortunately, statistically, that usually results in more than one fatality, because at least one more person goes in and dies before the third person says, not me. Yeah, confined space fatalities usually involve multiple fatalities because the other people want to go in and help and end up losing their lives. Needle stick, this is kind of unique to the medical industry, hospitals and healthcare. And again, this is bizarre. So you can transmit disease from a dirty needle that you come into contact with, and it breaks the skin. However, in the healthcare industry, this is bizarre. You're treating a trauma victim and blood from that victim splashes into your eyes or your mouth. It doesn't get recorded on the log until a disease is diagnosed. You can stick your finger with a needle, but some victim's blood can pour into your mouth and you don't have to put it on the log. Help me figure out the logic there. Doesn't make much sense to me. Hearing loss. This is hearing loss that's diagnosed by a physician, and it's a threshold shift that's more than 25 decibels above what they call audiometric zero. Now, retesting, it's not unusual for companies that do audiometric testing. They do it on a Monday. But what happens if the employee whose hearing is being tested goes out shooting on Sunday without hearing protection? They're going to have a temporary loss. So with hearing loss, you only record after a second retest confirms that hearing loss. Any questions? So we have different forms that we use. We refer to the OSHA 300 log. That's actually the form that you use either paper form or electronically. And this is interesting. How many of you use the Excel spreadsheet to record your injuries? OSHA, they stopped providing the Excel spreadsheet. I have no idea why. I have a message into somebody at OSHA. I went to the website because one of our clients wanted the Excel spreadsheet. I went and looked for it. It's not there anymore. I have no idea why they removed that. It's legal to keep them electronically. You can do that. There's other third-party software programs that allow you to track incidents and illnesses, but for whatever reason, they're not providing the Excel spreadsheet to do that, which is very convenient. So you have the 300 log. That's the form that we use. We'll look at some examples. You have the 300A summary, and that's where you transition or transpose the totals at the bottom of the 300 log onto the 300A form, and you record the total hours worked, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then there's something called the 301 or equivalent. So if you're scared, oh, Gary, I've never heard of an OSHA 301 form before. Am I legal? As long as you have the state first report of injury form, the Colorado first report of injury, whatever state you're using, that is an equivalent to the 301. More details for the incident. You can only put so much information on the 300 log. Here's the 300 log. Easy. Usually people just number these, starting with number 1. If you want to put your own numbering, you can. Employee's name, job title, date of injury, location where the incident occurred. Column F is where I see people get into trouble. You have to describe the injury, the part of the body that's affected, and what it was that contributed to that injury. 3 things. I've seen citations issued because the employer didn't fill that out completely. So if you get the wrong inspector and you haven't filled the form out correctly, I mean, this is a minor infraction, but we can avoid it if we do the right thing. So for example, this is ridiculous. I've seen it. So somebody in my workforce was outside in the middle of summer and suffered from heat exhaustion or heat stroke that required some kind of medical treatment. And this actually happened, the employer was given a citation because they put heat stroke in there. They didn't describe, so the injury was heat stroke. What part of the body was affected? What part of the body is affected by heat stroke? The whole body? This one is really, really weird. What was it that caused the heat stroke? Heat. So they actually gave a client, this is a true story, a client a citation. And I think somebody at the client kind of did something to aggravate the compliance officer. Like, don't you have anything else better to do than to harass me? See, when you get pulled over by the police, they always recommend that you're very polite and very cooperative. I would give the same advice when you have an OSHA inspection. That was pretty small. And actually, how many of you have been through an OSHA inspection and the informal conference where you go and talk about it? Nobody? You have? So I've worked with this client, not one of the better clients I've ever worked with for obvious reasons. But when we went in to negotiate the penalties, I argued that was kind of small to give a citation for it, and they threw it out. So there's damage control. We also do a workshop, I'm sure we'll do it again next year, called How to Survive an OSHA Inspection. And so anybody have another 3 hours? Yeah, it's honest to God, it's a 3-hour workshop, but no. If you're a random inspection, if you're on that site-specific targeting list, then they can do a wall-to-wall inspection. If they're there on a complaint, the inspection needs to focus on the complaint. But that gets into a whole bunch of different parameters. I take it you'd be interested in attending the workshop? Yes.
Careful of the pictures you take, right? Because they could look in the background of the pictures and see something, right?
Yes. Oh yeah. Whenever I work with a client, actually, I've had a client that I've looked at the pictures before they sent it to OSHA to show that they corrected that. I'm like, oh my God, look at this. Guy's got his hand in the machine. You don't want to send him that picture. I'll never forget a major insurance company, CNA Insurance, had put out some promotional brochures about, their insurance program for contractors and their commitment to help with health and safety. And they got a bunch of guys on a roof in tennis shoes without fall protection. And I'm like, it was a marketing person who did that, not somebody involved in risk or underwriting. So that can create problems. All right, here is these are the 4 columns. Another common mistake. I have an employee who lost time, and after the employee lost time, they came back to work on restrictions. For each row, there should only be one check mark in death, days away from work, job transfer, or medical treatment. I've seen clients say, well, he lost time, so I put a check here. He came back on restriction, so I put a check here. You just double counted one injury.
So, okay, actually, I'm doing this right now. So under the injury column, you don't put injury for everyone, even though everyone was an injury.
Here?
Yeah.
Well, if it's not an injury, then it needs to be one of these other things.
Oh, so just those ones.
Yes.
Okay.
Letters, one letter check and one number check, basically.
In these four, there should only ever be one.
What about on the numbers, Gary? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the other side, that's injury. So one number, one sign.
It would be one check in one of those columns.
Yeah. But GH,
CCIG.
K, and L, you only need one.
Well, here's where you actually put the number of days that they lost.
Cool.
Which is interesting because in all the safety statistics that we use, we never, in a calculation that I use the number of days that somebody missed from work. The incident rates only involve these columns here.
So it counts the same as 1 day or 15 days then.
Yeah. Now, when you look at these columns, it kind of gives you an indication of how severe that incident might have been. And I think that's why they have that. I'll tell you one thing though, if I look at one of your logs and I see a check mark in days away from work, and then I look over in how many days were there away from work, and I see 1 day, I see red flags because they were hurt so badly that they missed 1 day from work, and then after that 1 day, they came back on full duty. What that tells me is that there is the need for an aggressive return to work program. And it was the physician who kind of took advantage of that situation. Right? I mean, I could see where there was 1 day here and then maybe another 20 days of restricted work activity. But after 1 day to come back to work on full duty?
So if you wouldn't record days away from work and the job transfer or restriction, why would you put days in both of those columns? Are you supposed to do that?
Yes. So you have an employee who had both lost work days and restrictions. The problem is you're actually saying when we do the calculation and when you transpose these numbers from one form to another, you're saying that there were 2 incidents by marking those columns. Here is where you further define the number of days either lost or restricted.
So if they miss Friday, they have them Thursday, they miss Friday, but they come back on Monday on restricted duty.
So, great question. Thank you for asking the question. Here's another thing. The return to work form that your employee produces, if they go to the doctor, do you think his personal, do you think any doctor knows the OSHA record keeping rules? So here's what happens. They go in to see the doctor on a Friday, and the doctor says, when are you scheduled to work next? He says Monday. So the release form that your employee brings back to work says may return to work either on restricted or full duty on Monday. You just bought a 2-day lost work day incident because of the way that was written. The doctor doesn't know that we count calendar days. That release, had that employee been able to release the next day, it should have been written on the form.
Next, so it should be written based not a date, but a next day. Yeah.
If,
That was
yeah.
for Saturday, or the date Saturday.
So, but you know, if you knew that, so here's what happens. People that are responsible for record keeping, I've honestly been in, I have clients where, and no disrespect, there's jobs within companies that everybody has to do. But I have a client whose receptionist was keeping the OSHA log and was given the paperwork and enough information with which to fill out the log. Well, that person doesn't know the rules. You know the rules now. So if your employee, you would have a question for the doc. Would he have been able to return to work the next day? And if you pick up the phone and ask that question and they say yes, but he told me he didn't have to work until Monday, now you know what to do. It didn't happen. Ideally, you would get them to correct that. Make sense? Yes and no. Yes, right, right here.
Yeah.
They lose a couple of days of work and then they come back on restrictions. You only check this and then you put 2 days here and then however many days of restriction.
If they come back the same day after the clinic, we had to do a different transaction restriction, just found created it basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff,
Then you have to put that incident as under recordable case if they medical
if
treatment.
they had medical treatment. But that when are you scheduled to work next thing can come up a lot. And the doctor writes the release not when they were capable of coming back to work, but when they were scheduled to come back. Right. It's all calendar days. And that's where I've argued that an occupational clinic really should know these rules so that they help you so you don't have to train them. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I was under the impression that you had to miss more than 3 scheduled shifts before it's considered a lost time.
Work comp.
That's
They are not entitled to workers' comp, temporary disability benefits until they miss. Yeah. And then if they miss so many days, then they come back and pick up the first 3. It's still work comp, not OSHA recordability. Great question, though.
Great question. Great question.
Any other questions on this part of the form?
I have a question. Once you get to the 3.
Okay. Right here. So basically what happens is you are carrying over the number of check marks that you placed in those columns. And we use that to do our incident rates. I think this form was poorly designed. In fact, they should have had you calculate the incident rates on the form, to be honest with you, so you have a better idea of how that's done. That's one part of the form, and here's the other part of the form. What was your question on the 300A?
So on the 300A, say if you had more than one location, and you're supposed to post that 300A summary in a conspicuous location, by the coffee pot or whatever for a certain period of time each year.
Yes.
On that, do you have to have the total number of employees throughout the company and incidents throughout the company, or just for that location specific?
Great question. And we're going to get to that here in a minute, but ultimately logs should be kept for separate locations.
Total. Ever.
Exactly.
And
for
last year,
for construction job sites, if the job site is there for more than a year, then you need to keep a log for that. If you're a contractor and you're all over the place for less than a year, but if you have a physical presence at a job site, what they say for more than a year, you should keep a log.
But isn't it where the majority of your employees report to work? if only 5% of your employees go to that job site, and most of them come to your office.
No, I'm not familiar with that limitation. Do you want to leave now? So this is the 301 form. You know, honestly, a lot of this is just not effective, if you want my opinion. A lot of companies will just simply use the OSHA forms, and it'll ask you what happened, but nowhere on this form does it ask you what you're going to do to keep it from happening again. What good is that? So we can document how people die. We just never come up with a solution how to keep it from happening.
So is this form per incident? Or what is this form for?
So if you have a state first report of injury form, Mike, you don't need this form, which you're keeping.
Which.
Okay, multiple establishments. This actually is designed to answer your question. Log must be kept for every location expected to be in operation for a year. The number of employee exemption is determined by company, not individual location. We talked about that before. You can maintain all the logs for all your locations at one place. But if OSHA shows up, you need to be able to produce those forms. I can't remember what the time frame is. You need to be able to do that. Now, incidents must be recorded. I'm jumping ahead, but I'm also losing my voice. Incidents must be recorded on the log within 7 business days of your knowledge of that event. So if you're compiling your logs in January for the 24 incidents that occurred during the year, if you were asked to produce that log by OSHA, you would be in violation for not having a current log.
Go back and change the log.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely allowed to change the log. Depending on what happens, right? Like an injury occurs in December that's lost work days. You're going to be tracking how many days they lose in 25, but you're going to come back to that 24 log to finalize how many days that person actually lost with a cap of 180. If they miss 3 years, you can just put 180 in there and call it a day.
How would you define a separate location? Is there specific criteria for that? So we have our corporate office here in Denver, but we also have an estimator and project manager in Phoenix, but he doesn't have an office. Everything's run through us.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I would consolidate all that.
Okay.
Like a salesperson who's working out of their house. I would consolidate all that. Okay, employees, doesn't matter. I mean, the ironic thing is OSHA applies to employers and employees. And believe it or not, OSHA rules do not apply to sole proprietors or partners. They're owners in the business. Isn't this weird? So if you're a tuck pointer and you're a one-man operation and you're swinging on knots of a rope, doing your pointing work, and OSHA says, hey, what are you doing? You're violating every rule in the book. If you're a sole proprietor, I guess, according to OSHA, you have the right to kill yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's for employees, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, but that's interesting because you're the owner of a corporation and you're paid by the corporation. Now you're an employee. You're an employee. Seriously. That's kind of how that works. Weird thing. Hourly salary, seasonal, part-time, migrant. And here's the catch-all, all directly supervised workers. Geez, I wonder what that means. That means temp workers. So this gets really complicated for some companies that use temporary employees. If you are using temporary employees and you're giving that temp employee day-to-day direction and they get hurt at your facility or doing work for you, that's your injury on the log, even though that company is paying the work comp. The only exception is if you use a temp service, and some companies have huge temp workforces where a supervisor from the temp agency is supervising those workers, then you distance yourself from that. Then it effectively becomes like a subcontractor. But if you're giving day-to-day direction, even though their comp claim is going to be funneled through the temp agency you got them from, their injury goes on your log. And so do their hours. The hours work because you wouldn't want to take the penalty of the injury with also taking credit for the number of hours they work. More hours is good on that 300A form, as we will learn. Make sense?
So Gary, another one. So we had the temp worker, that the temp agencies in Colorado, they're working in Wyoming. They got injured on the job. They may be a career workers' comp person, but so they milked these restricted days and then went back to work and claimed to re-injure their ankle and then got a bunch more days off. Are we responsible for the second one?
No. Re-injury of an injury that you've already taken the hit for doesn't count. You know, that,
One day, repeat.
yeah, you know, ultimately what I would do is work with the claims adjuster.
Okay.
If they only add this to an existing first claim, then I would argue it's not a second injury. I maybe off the top of my head, and I'm not a claims person, if they had not been, I'm not even going to make that statement. Even if they'd been fully released and it could be tied back to the original injury, I wouldn't want to take credit for a second one. I would be looking for ways to tie that all the way back to the first. And that becomes complicated with a temp because you're not handling the comp. And here's the other thing. You have a temp worker you directly supervise, and you don't hire these people and they're off work for 2 weeks. You're the employer who hired a temp to get the work done. Do you want to bring them back on light duty? I mean, so there's a lot of weird dynamics at work. But if you don't bring them back to work on light duty, that's yours if you directly supervise them. It's a weird one. Kind of that no man's land.
Yeah. Reported on mods, the $0 up to what's called the split point. This year it's 14,500, but that varies each year. Is weighted really heavy in the mod equation. The dollars from 14,500 on to the top end of the claim are weighted at a much lower amount, typically 7 to 15%. So if you can get a new claim tied back to the original claim, where it's just a continuation of that original claim, then the dollars for that new claim would then be added to likely the less expensive weighted part onto a mod equation. So I mean, it's rare when it can be done, but when it can be done, it will improve your mod.
Yeah, great point. Better to have it all tied back to that original as it grows in size. Bill Young is our data specialist, mathematician, and Bill helps a lot of clients with their experience modification rating, projecting it, determining if there could be errors within the experience model, which there are errors. So Bill's part of CCIG, who provides a very unique and specialized service to our clients. Because just as you're impacted by incident rates, which is what I'm here to discuss, the financial component, your experience modification rating is where Bill's expertise lies. All right, so the annual summary form, you enter the totals, you enter the number of hours worked by all employees. That's everybody. So, make a point right now. At the end of the year, Tim, I think we had this conversation. At the end of the year, you go to payroll and you say, how many hours were worked this year? So payroll gives you a number, but my understanding is typically those hours are only going to include hourly employees. Your companies have salaried people? Do they fill out time cards or punch in? Typically, no. But they're employees, aren't they? If they get hurt, they go on the log. But if we only ask payroll for information, we're not getting the number of hours worked by salaried employees. And if you don't include those numbers, when we do the incident rate calculations, you're going to be penalizing yourself. So when you complete the number of hours worked, make sure you do it for all employees.
So temps too, huh?
Temps too. That'll help, Mike. More hours. If you're taking the penalty for an injury for a temp, take the credit that their hours represent when you do the calculation. So how many hours would a salaried person typically work a year? 2,080 hours. Now, early in my career, I would have said that would have been like having a vacation, right? Maybe I'm more like, 3,000, 3,500 hours a year. Now, the interesting thing is you could take credit. And now remember, more hours is always good when you do a calculation. Bill can explain the mathematical reason. I just know that's the case. See, incident rates like golf, the lower the score, the better. But if you could track the number of hours salaried people actually work through some kind of a job site log, you can take credit for the greater hours if you go to that extent. Log must be certified and signed by a company executive. Highest ranking official is who they generally ask for. Why do you think they want a company executive to sign the log? Do you believe safety programs largely can be driven from the top down of an organization? Why do you think they want the executive to sign the log? To make them aware of what's going on within the company. Now, that's correct, and that's a good thing. The problem is the stupid forms that our government developed for them to sign don't tell them anything. I see a bunch of data on a page. They don't make us calculate the incident rate. And even if they did make us calculate the incident rate, they don't have us compare it to what the industry is doing. Now, if I'm an executive, I'm signing something, I have no idea what it means. So I believe as safety professionals and human resource people and others responsible for safety, when we present that to the executive, we need to define those things. Now, some of you may be doing that already. Some of your executives may know that your incident rate of recordables is well below your peer group, which is good. Those are things we need to communicate. That's why OSHA requires this be signed. But they did nothing to help us present it in a way that helps that executive understand what they're signing, which I think is a shortcoming. We'll talk about that. So, got to keep it in place from February until end of April, but you can leave it up all year if you want to. Updating, Updating the log would be if you have reason to take an incident off of the log, would be they are losing time in 25, they're finally back at work, you go back to that 24 log, put the total number of days in, not to ever exceed 180. And that's between restrictions and lost work days. So if they had 180 lost work days and then came back on restrictions for 180, you don't put anything in the restricted column. 180 capped total days
180.
per incident. Current logs must be available within 7 business days of notice of your knowledge of a recordable. Now, if somebody doesn't report it for a month and a half, you're not penalized for not recording something you didn't know about, right? So if somebody comes back and says, well, I was hurt a month and a half ago, you're not in violation because you didn't know about it.
So if somebody,
You need, if OSHA asks, you need to be able to produce the current year log plus the 5 previous years. Anything beyond that, beyond the statute of limitations, I don't know why you'd get rid of them, but you don't have to keep them. And you can have the information available electronically. Already talked about updating. Change in ownership, believe it or not, OSHA requires the sellers of a business to transfer the OSHA records to the new business owner. Yeah. They want to see what the pattern has been for this particular client. All right, electronic record keeping. Talk briefly about this, but many of you are required, not construction, not yet, are required to file the information on your 300 and 300A form electronically with the federal government. Not construction yet. That may happen. If I had to put money on it, I would say that it will not under the new administration, but it could. I've included, and oh, by the way, we will email everyone who attended a copy of the presentation so that you'll have this. If you're into self-abuse, it will be made available on YouTube for you to watch and torture yourself again. Didn't find that funny, did you? But yeah, you'll have this information. So electronic record keeping is the way the government is getting real-time information about what's happening at your facilities. Now, the weird thing is they collect the data, even though the forms don't have you calculate the incident rates, which I'm going to show you how to do. They're calculating them. They don't have you calculate it. It makes no sense to me, but they get the data, they make the calculation, and then determine if your incident rates are high enough to be inspected. So behind the scenes, some of you may be furnishing data that could result in an inspection. Never knew it.
so
these are the groups that all construction contractors are, that's not correct. These are the designated industries. No, I take that back. Contractors are required to report electronically. You're just not being inspected under the site-specific targeting program. Apologies for the confusion. How many of you are submitting any of this electronically?
Last year, I haven't done it yet this year.
Yeah, I think it's a weird date, like March 3rd or March 8th or something like that, that it has to be submitted. So backing up a little bit, if you have more than 20 employees, now all these employee limits for record keeping, here's a new spin. For electronic record keeping, if you have more than 20 employees and you are included in the appendix that I'm going to show, you need to be reporting those electronically to the government. Failure to do so is a violation. So these are, not sure if it cuts it off, but you can see the big ones are right here. If you're in agriculture, utilities, construction, manufacturing, wholesale trade, you have more than 20 employees, you're required to file electronically. It's called the injury tracking application. And you set up an account.
You actually.
Every year. And I've got the date, March 2nd. I should have put 25 on this slide. This is so complicated. And I believe this is going to change. This may change with the new administration. Part of it. So more than 20, less than 250 employees, you report the data that's on the 300A form. If you have more than 250 employees, then they actually, do you have more than 250? If you have more than 250 employees, currently, you have to provide details about each incident that's on the log, not including the person's name, but a description of what happened, at least a description of what happened. So more detail than if you have less than 250 employees. So if you have questions about this, if anything's confusing, you've got my contact information, or you will when we send you the slides. Give me a call. There's different layers of different industries and what's required to be reported. So I'm not going to necessarily get into that detail. This should look familiar to what you see when you report. I kind of took screenshots. You put the case number. Usually it's 1 through whatever number. Job title, date of injury. Describe the injury or illness. This is if you have enough employees where you have to report the detail from each. You kind of fill out, what did it result in? How many days of restriction? And then the category in the far right of that 300 form where you describe the injury. And then some more information. So these are all screenshots of the form that you have to complete. You really need to look carefully to see. One of the important things that I preach to people is, do you know what your industry code is? If you use the incorrect industry code on the 300A form, you may be penalizing yourself or you may be helping yourself, depending on what the industry code is. Remember, they're calculating your incident rates and comparing it to your peer group. But if the peer group you select has more hazards and experiences more injuries, then you're going to actually benefit because your business is not properly described and has fewer hazards, or it could work in reverse. If you're an office environment and you put steel erection contractor and you have one incident, well, in reverse, if you're a steel, yeah, I'm confusing myself now. Gary, stop talking while you're ahead. Words, higher risk, yes. So you need to find your group that you compare, and I can help you do that. I can show you where you find it on the OSHA website. So, but would you be keeping separate logs at each of those locations, and you would need to file those separately? Actually, each location is Each location for which you're keeping a log is filed separately, electronically. Now, sometimes you have multiple operations going on under one roof and you consolidate them. I would argue that could be one log. And what I would do is use the most dangerous code, which makes it pretty sure that you have a choice to make, right? We do 3 different things. Each one has a different code to it. We're all under one roof. Pick the code that reflects the more dangerous work because you're likely going to be underneath that. If you pick the safest of the 3, then you put yourself at risk of being more than average. Hopefully I'm not confusing people. March 2nd is when you have to do the electronic record keeping. If you have questions, give me a call. Be happy to talk to you. The electronic information is public. Bill Young has said a couple of words today. I work with Bill. This is a spreadsheet. There are 390,000 businesses that have filed electronically with the government. And what the other thing we'll make available to you is a list of these companies. So number one, you can see your company if you have filed, or better yet, you can compare to your competitors. Wouldn't it be nice to go to a customer and say, hey, I think you'd rather deal with us than these guys here because their incident rates are high? You know who else looks at this electronic information? Lawyers and labor unions. Making this information public is a big deal. And the better the information, the more accurate the information is in your benefit. All right, so where do we find all of this data that's being filed? So you go to the OSHA website, you click on the link, it's www.osha.gov. You'll see the homepage, you'll go to Help and Resources, and then click Data. You're going to click next on Injury Application, Injury Tracking Application, and then this is an old screenshot from a prior year. I think the most current information we have would be through 23 now. You click on the most current year of data. That will take you to a zip file, I believe, which contains the OSHA Excel spreadsheet, and then you get a list. And it's 393,000 businesses in the United States that meet the criteria by nature of the work they do and by the number of employees that they have are required to file electronically. There are many companies that are unaware of this and not tracking data. There's probably should be double the number of companies that are actually filing electronically. So we've got this spreadsheet available. When you get a copy of the presentation, you will also get a copy of, Bill, how did you arrange it? The spreadsheet focused on Colorado because it's massive. To scroll through this is a pain. But both Colorado as well as the other states, but I think you make it easy to find Colorado, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
Got it. And there's a lot for Colorado. All right, part of the record keeping standard, believe it or not, has requirements a lot of employers are not aware of. It actually requires that you notify an employee how to report a work-related injury. If you have an employee handbook, the handbook should have requirements about how to report, when to report a work-related incident, and you should maintain. Do you maintain documentation of the employee handbook and employees signing off on company rules? If not, you should. If OSHA ever walked in and said, has your employer instructed you how to report a workplace incident, workplace injury? If they say no, it's incumbent upon you to prove that they did, that you did. You know, one of the things that the standard says is that you tell your employees they have the right to report injuries. Matter of fact, the one thing they don't say, which you should say, is that if you don't report an injury, there will be consequences for that behavior. Like we talked about, the essential thing is for you to know about an injury in order for you to be able to treat it and deal with it properly. So a best practice is to develop that written procedure and communicate to all of your employees. Prohibition against discrimination. Believe it or not, those things we talked about before, having safety incentive programs, post-accident drug testing, OSHA, believe it or not, referred to those practices potentially as being discriminatory. I could have picked a different word. Why they chose to phrase it that way, I don't know. It's what they did. But those are the controversial aspects. And the prohibited activities that we talked about, just to repeat, blanket post-injury drug testing. The best thing is to have a for-cause program. Discipline for late reporting some injuries. Just use good judgment. You know that somebody can lift something, maybe not realize they strained or sprained something. Those things do happen, right? We want to minimize to the greatest extent because that's late reporting of injuries is probably the biggest loophole employees will use to take advantage of the work comp system. Because they get hurt, they go home, they seek their own medical treatment, which even though you have procedures in place, they seek their own medical treatment. Now you're behind the 8 ball. You need to make it very clear that they have to report those incidents immediately, no matter how minor. If you even think you got hurt at work, you need to tell somebody. So these things are what OSHA considers discrimination, but I believe the next administration is going to push this aside. You're required to report fatality. This is actually part of the record keeping standard, required to notify OSHA within 24 hours if an employee is hospitalized, inpatient, not for observation. Big difference. If an employee falls, they're taken to the hospital, and the hospital says, we're going to keep this person overnight for observation. That doesn't count as hospitalization. What you're going to need to do is to get some kind of documentation from the doctor or hospital indicating that it was not inpatient. Sometimes that's difficult to do. You're required to notify OSHA within 24 hours after an amputation or the loss of an eye. Now, the weird thing about the loss of an eye, and they actually define this, only if the eye itself is lost and presumably not found. But no, I'm serious. Blindness, as long as the eye is still in place, does not require notification. Some of this just doesn't make any sense.
Why?
So as long as you have your eye organ in place, you don't have to, you cannot see it, and you're not required to pick up the phone and call OSHA. Weird. With a fatality, it's within 8 hours of your knowledge of the fatality. Sometimes work-related fatalities, the employee is taken to the hospital, may stay in the hospital for 2 or 3 days before they pass. At that point, they're hospitalized. You have 24 hours to notify OSHA of the hospitalization. You know, some suggestions with respect to reporting these things. You don't want to pick up the phone right away. If you've had a fatality, you don't want to pick up the phone right away. You want to find out what happened. You want to control the scene. You have a lot of other obligations. You have notifications to make family members, probably one of the more difficult things you may ever have to do, speaking from experience, but You do want to make sure that you notify them within those prescribed timeframes. Give yourself enough time to manage the situation. There are a number of ways you can do it. You can pick up the phone and call the local area office. There's also an online form that you can fill out on the federal OSHA website for all states. And my recommendation would be to take the online approach because it might buy you a little bit more time. If there's been a hospitalization or a fatality, you can almost guarantee that there will be an on-site inspection. With an amputation, they may notify you and ask for information about the amputation. But almost always, if there's a hospitalization, especially depending on the circumstances, if it was a fall, there will be an on-site inspection. And you need to prepare for that. If any one of these things happen, just pretty much count on the fact that there will be an inspection. If you're a client, I have a lot of experience in assisting clients with inspection. If you ever have one of these things happen, give me a call. I'd be happy to help guide you through the process. If I'm available, I need to be there if I could for the inspection. All right, let's talk about the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because that's the agency that ultimately is going to collect the data that we need to compare our performance to. Your work comp experience mod, if you're an electrical contractor, your work comp experience modification rating is compared to other electrical contractors, not steel erection contractors, but your own peer group. And the same thing happens with the data that we're talking about here. Now, I mentioned the fact that OSHA collects your data from your OSHA 300 forms, but separately, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they also send out survey forms to employers. Has anybody here ever gotten a form from the Bureau of Labor Statistics? And you're required to complete it. It says response required by law. That doesn't go to OSHA. What they're doing is collecting the data that allows you to benchmark yourself against your peers. So if you get something from the BLS, it can't be used against you when you complete it. It's simply being used to provide data to compare yourself to others. And regardless of your industry or size, you're required to complete that form that's sent to you from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the whole point is to benchmark. Why do we fill out the OSHA logs? Well, I think this is understated, but number one, we have to do it because it's the law. But the other useful reason, it's information we can use. Do you want to know how good you are compared to your peers? I guess it depends on if your experience is good or bad. If it's really good, you want to know you're doing better than your peers. I would argue if you're not, it's even more important for you to know. You don't want to get caught by surprise. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how are we performing based upon the information we complete on the OSHA 300 log. There are three rates that safety people tend to focus on. The recordable incident rate, some people call this the total recordable incident rate. There's all kinds of different acronyms that are used. The bottom line, if the injury was bad enough to be recorded on the log, whether it's stitches or a fatality, that is a recordable incident. If it's on the log, it's a recordable incident. The DART rate, which is the next most significant rate, would be any incident that results in days away from work and or restricted work activity. So my injury was significant enough that it wasn't just stitches. I needed to get better. I needed either time away from work and restrictions or restrictions. So if it results in either or, because you can have one that results in days away from work and restrictions, like we talked about. One of those two things, that is a DART incident. Stands for days away, restricted, or transfer. The most significant rate we look at, you could argue we should have a fatality rate, but hopefully there aren't. It's 0. The DAFWE rate is the incident rate that involves only those injuries that involve lost work days. DAFWE stands for Days Away from Work, Injury, and Illness, where they came up with that goofy acronym. These are the calculations we do. If you want to know the incident rate of recordables for your company, you take the number of incidents that are on the OSHA log, you multiply by 200,000, and then you divide that number by the total number of hours worked by your company. The constant is 200,000. So effectively, 200,000 hours would represent the number of hours worked by a company with 100 employees. And we are actually coming up with a rate. How many recordable incidents do we have per 100 employees based upon this calculation? That way I can compare a company with 25 employees to a company with 25,000 employees. We come up with a rate so it's a fair comparison from one to another. Make sense? All right, so we can calculate our rates, but where do we find where our peer group is performing? And that's from information again. I've included the link here, and again, you'll get this information. The most current data. Okay, and I've provided some color coding here. So once you go to that link, you will scroll and you will look for the closest description to what you do. And here are the descriptions. These are the industry groups. And I only took one screenshot of the screen I was looking at. It will tell you what the code is. NAICS, North American Industrial Classification System. That is the code that represents what your business does. You need to have the right code that really reflects what you're doing, because if you mismatch that, you could be shooting yourself in the foot. This green arrow points to the recordable incident rate. This is the number of incidents per 100 employees. Let's take, for example, poultry and egg production. For every 100 employees in that industry, 6.1 out of 100 are injured badly enough to appear on the log. Yeah. Because Mike, well, who knows, right? Well, to some extent, it's a focus that, would you argue that the construction industry pretty much these days places a pretty heavy focus on safety? There are other industries where it's not the case. And to some extent, you know, the fact that owners and general contractors scrutinize you to such an extent might be a good thing. It's kind of a hassle, but it leaves little room. Whereas other industries don't have that kind of external pressure. Now they have financial pressure. Presumably, other industries that don't have that pressure, that have injuries, are being penalized in terms of what they pay. Okay, so the DART rate is this blue arrow right here. Now, again, when you get the presentation and you go to that site to find your number, follow these areas. See this column where it says cases with days away from work, job restriction, or transfer? The total would be all injuries that resulted in days away from work and injuries that resulted in restricted work activity. That's the blue arrow. So for poultry and egg production, out of every 100 employees, 4.5 are injured badly enough that they lose time from work or have restrictions. The red arrow is the DAFWE rate or the incident rate of lost workday injuries. The red arrow, this column right here. So for poultry and egg production, for every 100 employees, 2.4 are hurt badly enough that they miss work. So the three rates, incident rate of recordables, the DART rate, this is the one OSHA focuses on, the blue arrow, DART rate, and the DAFWE rate, which is the incident rate of lost workday incidents. So this is where we find our peer group. We calculate our rates and then we compare them to those rates that you see on the page. If you're below the industry rate, go to your boss if you're responsible for safety and ask for a raise. If you're above the peer group rate, go to your boss and ask for a raise because more effort and work needs to be done to improve the rates. So see, I put you in a position where you can get a raise either way. This is important. If we're not already calculating our rates. Now, if you're in construction, how many of you in construction are pretty well aware of what your incident rates are? If not, you really should be, because this really does matter in the scheme of things. You know, the other thing, which we talk about in the OSHA inspection workshop, OSHA will ask to see a copy of your log. You may not know this. They're calculating incident rates, and they're comparing your log and the incident rates. They'll find the peer group data. So if you don't know what your incident rate is, the compliance officer will. And if your rate is double, which is bad, your peer group, when they find hazards in the workplace, what do you think the mental logic is? Well, of course, I'm going to find hazards because their rates are double what their peer group is. Whereas if your rate was very good and they find hazards, then the perspective is more the exception to the rule. You see how subtle those things can be? And it's why I keep preaching. The most important thing to do with this data is to calculate the rates and understand what they mean. And the only thing we can do is to compare it to our peers. You know, like me, when I compare my level of fitness, I always look to a 32-year-old, somebody in the same age group as me, so I can do a fair comparison, which inevitably works out not in my favor. All right. So the data is important. And unfortunately, the method that OSHA gave us to record these incidents and injuries really didn't do us any favor, because nowhere on that form do you see anything about performing an incident rate calculation. Now, if you have no life at all like me, you will find on the OSHA website where these calculations are, but they don't put them on the log, which I think is a huge mistake. And honestly, if you want to communicate important information to the executive who has to sign this log, I would include the incident rates compared to your peer group so that they have an idea of how you're performing. And if you're responsible for safety, if you're performing worse than your peer group, probably ought to have some ideas on what could be done to improve that. And part of what we wanted to talk about today are the things you can do, even in terms of just recording the incidents. If it doesn't need to be on the log and you put it on the log, you're making that rate worse than your peer group. If you can work with a clinic to avoid a release form that shows that this employee missed time from work when they didn't need to miss time from work, you're over-reporting and penalizing yourself on those rates. So Not only do I believe there's an opportunity to prevent incidents in the workplace, which obviously makes your record better, but just the accuracy of the record keeping itself. And it's somewhat complicated. In many cases, it doesn't make any sense. And for that reason, why I'm making you the offer. If you want to discuss any of these cases, I'd be happy to do so over the phone or help you determine whether or not you need to file electronically. This stuff matters because people look at it. So when you want to look for the data, this is, and again, you'll get a copy of the slides. Main page, the home page, help and resources, data. Then we have to scroll down. So this arrow right here means I couldn't screenshot it. You scroll down. The BLS data is located here, other data. When you click that, you'll have a pop-up and it says Bureau of Labor Statistics, injuries, illnesses, and fatalities. Click that link, then click industry incident rates. You'll see all kinds of hyperlinks. This is the one you click, and again, you'll get a copy of this, and that's what will happen. You'll open that page that we looked at before, and that's where all of those benchmark rates are located. Common mistakes is you're not keeping the forms current. Incorrect completion of form. Here are some simple examples. There was one injury, hurt back. That's not a legal description, as we discussed, but it resulted in days away from work and restrictions. There should have been one check mark. It goes in the most serious outcome. You never put the second check mark on the same row. The description column, you describe the injury, part of the body affected, and what it was that caused it to happen. Another common violation. Classifying the case, you mark more than one of those boxes in the same row. Never enter more than 180 days or a total of 180 for both lost work days and restrictions. Keep it periodically updated if you have to carry injuries from one year to the other. The wrong person signs the form. Again, the same company that got a violation for heat stroke also got a violation which they did not toss out because it was I think it was a safety supervisor at the plant that signed the form instead of the highest executive. Highest ranked executive. Says this company kind of earned what they had coming to them. So anyway, accurate record keeping is important. If you're in construction, this is critically important. If you're not in construction, it's critically important because the data that's being collected can be used to initiate a site-specific targeting inspection. Correcting my error I made earlier, contractors do have to file electronically, but you would not be subject to site-specific inspections based upon the data you're submitting. And copy of my most recent MRI. So that's, we finished in 3 hours, which sometimes that doesn't exactly happen. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Specific cases you brought with you to discuss?
So if you file and then you find, say, a year later, you had significant errors in that filing, can you go back and amend that filing?
No, they lock it out. I can't tell you exactly when they lock it out electronically. You could do it on your paper form or your own Excel spreadsheet. But at a certain point, it doesn't allow you to go back in and correct historical data. What would happen, God forbid, if you got a knock on the door, you would say, well, here's the evidence I have that shows that this claim was closed out. It was never supposed to be recorded in the first place because our claims adjuster denied the work comp claim. Unfortunately, you can't go back in and correct it.
Unfortunately.
Anything else? How many of you would be interested in how to survive an OSHA inspection? All right, well, the same way you got the notification this time, it'll come out again. I guess the way I look at things is if you walk out of here today just knowing two little kernels of things that you didn't know before you came in, then we accomplished something. But I do appreciate your participating in the workshop today, and the offer stands. Anytime you feel like chatting, give me a call. If you have a question, need clarification, assistance of any kind, I'm more than happy to help. Thank you for coming today, and have a safe year.
Thank you.